So with having the surface for our button modeled, we also have to take care for the tunnel surface that button, for example, would slide inside. And it is not advisable that inside Alias or in any modeling software, you would just take the surface for our button and trim it together with the joystick. So we have the space for the button to go in, because the two surfaces, so the tunnel wall of our joystick and the wall of our button, would occupy the same space. What we have to do here is basically create a duplicate, at least, of the side surfaces of our button and turn that into a cylinder, which then we could use to remove a space out of the joystick volume where our button would go in. And a very easy way to do this, because we're using the construction history, is to, for example, I zoom in here, and then we can select this curve, and we are going to create an offset of that curve. And here is the offset button, or we could also use the surface. But let's take a look first what the offset button actually is doing. So if I click on offset with this curve selected, you will see that there is now a new green curve and a green arrow. If I click somewhere, hold my mouse button and then drag left and right, you can see that this green curve changes its curvature. Offset is basically a shrink or expand command. So it's not like scale, which is only changing the scale of an object. The offset is really changing also the shape. And as you can see, the more I offset it inwards, the more, for example, the surface is going to be intersected, and that is bad geometry. If I, for example, click on the triangle, I offset to the outside, and there you can see that the further I move the mouse away, the flatter and smoother that curve gets, because it just literally just offsets the curvature or the flow of that curve. And in our case, we only need a very small gap, so maybe something like this might be okay. You also see a distance here. I'm using metric right now, so I'm making an offset of 0.3 centimeters, or right now those are like roughly 3 millimeters. When that is good, you could, for example, then click offset, and then you have your second offset curve created. Now the nice part is, if I, for example, go back to select my original profile curve for the button, and maybe I select a point on that curve, like this one, or let's go to here, it's easier to see, and then maybe I move it a little bit up, you will see that the offset curve we created, because we're using the construction history, will also be updated. And then if we go to curve, select the outside offset curve, we could, for example, then go to surfaces and create a new revolve tool. But maybe that's not necessarily necessary, because we are creating basically a surface based on this profile. So instead of just making a duplicate of that curve and then creating another surface, we could maybe just go right ahead and offset the surface. Now the reason why maybe in this case we can do this is also because you can see the button surface does not intersect right now with the surface of our joystick, because that profile curve is still outside the space. So that is a good situation, because that allows us to simply select the surface, and then we can go to Object Edit and go Offset, and then we do an offset to the surface instead of the curve. And let's adjust the distance a little bit. Maybe like there. So that is pretty good. Then click Offset, and then that surface is created. So what we can do now in this next step, for the sake of making it a little bit easier to work, I just create a random layer right now, and I'm going to put my button in there. Actually, hold on. I can do it this way. So yeah, go to there and assign, and then hide it. So the button surface now is gone. And I could go ahead now and go to Surface Edit, go to Intersect, select my offset surface as the surface to intersect, click Go, and then I click the joystick surface, and you can see that it created a profile curve on each surface. Now also, as a small fresh up for the intersection tool, if you double click it, here you have an option to create a surface on both surfaces. So first, for example, I would only create an intersection curve on my button, but not on my joystick. And on both surfaces, it creates that cut surface curve on the button surface as well as a joystick surface. And then I can go to Trim. For example, click the upper part of my offset surface and say discard, and then I can click those two surfaces and say discard. And now, as you can see, I have a small tunnel basically, and when I add my button, of course from the side you won't really see this, but if we maybe zoom in a little bit, you can see that there is a small tunnel between that.